switch my camera off so that I can stand up, but you can still hear me okay, I think. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my session today. So my name is Jo, and you heard my formal introduction, but actually when I introduce myself at work to my students and colleagues, I'm a learning advisor. So I work outside the classroom mainly. I'm really interested in helping students to thrive and grow and really enjoy learning languages. So let me show you where I work. Oops. Okay, here we go. So I'm in Japan. So I've been there for a long time, and I'm at this university called Kanda University of International Studies, KUIS. So it's quite near Tokyo in Chiba Prefecture, and it's quite a new private university, and it specialises in languages and cultures and some liberal arts as well. And yeah, so I've been interested. I've been in teaching English language for many years, but I'm really interested in supporting outside classroom learning. So this is where I work. So this is my daily workspace. So it's a really big building. It opened in 2017, and it's called the SALC, Self-Access Learning Centre. And about 1,000 students visit the SALC every day. So it's a really busy, thriving, beautiful space full of people doing many different activities. And my goal is to help them to take charge of their learning and to become autonomous language learners. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the different ways we do that. Okay? And so here are some of the activities going on. I'll talk you through them more a little bit later. So in my talk, I'll start by looking at learner autonomy and explaining what it is, just briefly. I went to a wonderful presentation yesterday who did a really good job at that, much better than I can do today. I'll refer to it later. And then I'll talk about how self-access centres can promote learner autonomy and some of the trends as well. So we'll look at a little bit of the history of self-access, what it is, but how it started. I think what it looks like now is quite different from how it looked when it first emerged in the 1960s. So what we're going to focus on is how we can help our learners to thrive and flourish in addition to learning languages, of course. We're always focusing on the language. And then we're going to look at our role as well as educators. So in this kind of outside classroom learning environment, we're not teachers, but we have an important role to play. And so I'll tell you a little bit about advising. And I said I'm a learning advisor. It's my daily work. So I'll share a little bit about what I do. All right? Sound good? So, are you familiar with this term, learner autonomy? Is this something that comes up? I learned yesterday that it's covered in most master's courses these days, so I'm very happy to hear that. So yeah, just to give you a classic definition, it's the capacity to take charge of one's own learning. That's it, very simply. But then when you dig into that, it's very complicated, isn't it? So here's a more, kind of detailed definition from Lenny Dam et al. In 1990. So they say it's a readiness to take charge of one's own learning in the service of one's needs and purposes, and that it's a capacity and willingness to act independently and in cooperation with others as a social, responsible person. So that's quite a lot to unpack. All right, so you're taking charge of your learning in many different ways. All right. And yesterday I went to this wonderful talk that I've cited it, where I learned that Vietnamese learners are not passive, and many of them are very capable of autonomous language learning, which was really lovely to hear. But what I heard from the presenter yesterday was that they need more support, basically. They need to understand what autonomous language learning is, and then they also need help with doing it outside the classroom. Learning takes place outside the classroom quite a lot, and so, but often we don't know what our students are doing, and we're not supporting them well enough. So that's where self-access comes in. This is something we can do as educators to make sure students continue to learn, after they leave the classroom doors. All right? So this is my busy workplace. And at the front there, I don't know if you can see the bottom right-hand side, this is our learning drop-in desk. So students can drop in and talk to learning advisors at any time. So I do shifts on this desk as well. Or they can reserve us for appointments to talk about their learning. Okay, I'll tell you more about that later. I just wanted to point out the desk while this picture is here. So self-access language learning, or SALC. It's been around for a long time. So let's look at some common features of SALC in a self-access centre, which is SALC. So often we have resources. I think this is the classic one. So sometimes it looks like a library, but actually it's nothing like a library when you look closely at what happens. But it does have lots of language learning resources, authentic resources as well, not just for language, but things of interest in English or the target languages as well. It has worksheets often. It could be grammar or vocabulary or things that students actually need to do what they need to do. We have things like strategy sheets and activities that people can do, and the tips on which materials they should use if they want to get started on different language skills, so that students can start by analysing their needs. What do I need to improve today? And how can I find something in the SALC that will help me? So far this is quite individualised, isn't it? So a student can go in on their own, find something, you don't need a teacher, get some help from these leaflets and worksheets and find something and do it by yourself, and that's fine. But I think we can do better than that. So this is where the social features come in. So our SALC is so big. Our first SALC actually was just a couple of classrooms. It was really small, it was always packed, and students loved to get together to learn together. And so the second SALC was much bigger, but gave more spaces for students to work together. And this one now that I'm showing you is the third one, and it opened in 2017 because we needed more space for this kind of thing, students to get together. That turned into the main reason, and I'll show you why when we look through the history. So students can also meet with teachers and learning advisors to get tips and hints and help and support with their language learning, but also with how to learn as well, which is what learning advisors do. We also have conversation lounges. So this is where students can get together with other students, or maybe staff and teachers on duty, to practice the language that they're learning. In our case, we have an English learning lounge. But as we teach other languages as well, including Vietnamese actually, and we have mini SALCs for each of the other languages, so students can do this for the other languages they're learning as well. But the one I work in is for English, mainly. This is the drop-in desk, where one of my colleagues is talking to a student. And then we have lots of spaces where students can prepare their presentations, prepare their classwork, and work together and so on. So these are some features, I'd say, of a modern self-access centre. So it's more than just resources. But it's been a long journey, I think, to get here. So in the 1960s, the first SALCs that I heard of were in France, and it was as a way mainly for adult language learners to get more support outside the classroom. So they might take a class, adult education language class, once or twice a week, but of course it's not enough. And so while they're waiting for their next class, they can go to the SALC and get a worksheet or a grammar exercise or something that they need to help them practice the language before the next class. That was how it started, very simply. And I've kind of labelled this personalised learning. It's a way people were looking at their individual weaknesses, like, okay, what do I need? Okay, I'm weak on this point in grammar, so I'm going to go to the SALC and I'm going to work alone and improve this grammatical accuracy. Okay? And I think that's still fine. Of course, we need to do that as language learners. There are times when we do need to work alone, and we do need to study the language on our own, so that's absolutely fine. But what happens with each decade, we learn more about how languages are learned, and the SALCs have become more and more complex, so they've incorporated each phase with a new one. All right, so in the 1980s and 90s, we saw a lot of communicative language teaching coming in, didn't we, in the field of applied linguistics and language teaching and learning. And so, in turn, the SALCs became a lot more communicative, I guess. There were more tasks, we had more audio and text materials, more videos, computer-based activities started to come in as well, very simple ones. And we started to see universities, mainly, some schools, were helping students to become more autonomous. So it started to be promoted, so students could set goals and try to achieve their goals. So regardless of what the course entailed. The goals start with, what do I need, What do I need? Is it about the course? Probably not. Maybe you're going to study abroad, or maybe you're doing something for your own interest. So that's the starting point, what the student needs. So that we started to see more in the 80s and 90s. And then in the 2000s, there were computers became a main feature, actually probably too much when we look at it now, but the internet, of course, became very widely available, and it was used for more problem solving, more research, communication tasks as well. So forums, so people could communicate with other people via the internet, via forums and so on. teachers started creating websites for learners, and computers started to become a regular part of language learning. And then in the next phase, we saw that personal devices, soon everybody has a phone and all these kinds of things. And so we started to look, do we need a self-access centre? If everybody has a phone or a computer and they can access the resources, everything they need on their device, why do they need a self-access centre? So at this point, many SALCs, I would say, died. They just went away because the institution just did not see any need in updating the computers or creating the space when students could find it by themselves. But many really successful SALCs reinvented themselves. So it was a big turning point, and we became social learning spaces. I'll show you some pictures in a minute that might make more sense. And then we move into phase 5, which is where we are now, which I'm going to talk about in more depth in the second part of my presentation. But basically, it's where we're going beyond just language learning. We're looking at, human beings. We're looking at their basic psychological needs and well-being. Like, what do they need to thrive and to enjoy the process and to be lifelong learners, that they really enjoy what they're doing, right? So we'll look at that in a minute. All right, let's back up. So this is the early definition of self-access. So this is back in 1991. As you can see, it's quite limited, isn't it? So this is how it was defined. A way of describing learning materials, just materials, that are designed and organised in such a way that students can select and work on tasks on their own and obtain feedback on their performance. So, I still agree that self-access should have this, definitely, but we can do much more. So let's look at another definition. So actually my colleagues and I have been working on this, really hard in the last few years. And so we published this definition just this year, after a year of reviewing the literature again. So we went back and we actually expanded our search, and we looked at areas of the literature that we don't tend to look at much in applied linguistics. And you can read the article if you like later, there's citations there. But let me give you some of the main details. So our new definition of self-access is somewhere that facilitates pro-social and lifelong autonomous language learning within a diverse and multilingual learning environment. Okay, pro-social is that it's everyone's job to socialise and interact with others. It's not just the teacher's job. Everyone's job is to create a social space. We try to explain this to the students, and actually they're really into it. The second part of the definition is that our SALC provides supportive and inclusive spaces, resources, and facilities for developing ownership of the learning process. In other words, everyone should feel welcome there and feel like they can own their own learning. And the third part is that we start with the learner, as I mentioned before. So it takes the learner's previous experiences, interests, personality, motivations, needs, goals, all these things that make us human and complex and different, take these into account, and as a starting point, actually, when designing their learning, and promote confidence and competence when studying and using an additional language. So these three really important parts. Oh, I didn't have them all on one page. Anyway, the slides, you can have the slides later. But there are some pictures of some of the phases I've talked about. We still have these learning labs, these language labs in our university, but I think we have more than that as well. Okay, I still think they're kind of useful. It's a start, isn't it? Sometimes you just need to hear it.
Wow.
And even in the 80s, we were still doing this. And when you look at this picture, I think they're probably not autonomous. What do you think? Do you think these learners are autonomous? Or are they just doing homework? I think so, because look, they're all looking at the same screen, so they haven't chosen what they want to do. They've just been told by the teacher, do this activity. But if you could use this and the students choose what to work on, then it could be an autonomous learning support system, right? Yeah, but as this probably isn't, probably not. And this was our first SALC back in 2001. As you can see, it was pretty packed. This was before I worked there, by the way. So you can see the computers that come in. But many students have chosen to work together. They're not working by themselves. They're sharing the headphone jack, so they can both watch the movie together. Some are working alone, that's fine. They're all working on different things. that they have chosen to do, hopefully based on their needs, right? So this was sort of phase 2 going into phase 3. So autonomous learning is being promoted, and we also have computers to support this. And I don't know if any of you were working in this field back then, but I was, actually in the United Arab Emirates back then. And so many teachers were making these quizzes, or we were joining something called Dave's ESL Cafe, which was really fun at the time. And learners could join forums and post messages and interact with other learners from different parts of the world. It was pretty revolutionary, actually. I was working in the United Arab Emirates, where students really didn't have opportunities to speak to anyone outside their families. And then suddenly they can, talk to people in different parts of the world about different issues online. It was pretty sensational at the time, it was so different. And then we had, software packages and so on that still exist today. And I think some of them can promote autonomy, but not necessarily. Some of these software are very lockstep. You do page 1, page 2, page 3, page 3, unit 4, page, etc. You have to go through in order. But if you want to promote learner autonomy, the students should be able to choose which one is useful for them. So they're still useful, I think. But then we had a lot of this, didn't we? So students on their phones, are they working alone? Maybe they're messaging people in other parts of the world. But we don't know, and we're not there to support them, because they seem quite isolated to me. I don't know what they're doing. So I feel the next phase with the social learning environment, you can communicate with them every day, so you know if they need help, and they know, to help them to access good online resources. Because what we found is the students don't really know what learning materials to start with. They're online doing something, but it's not necessarily helpful. And so this is when we started to consider the social learning opportunities. So students would bring their devices, and we still had all the materials, but we purposely created groups where students could come together and talk and discuss their learning and talk to learning advisors. And then finally, the next one, they started to create their own groups and show much more ownership and leadership. So this is a picture I took that I found of Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. And I really like this one because it says, let's chat. So it seems to be a student-organized conversation practice group. We have things like this as well, it works beautifully. And students have brought their devices, of course, because they can probably check their words and maybe translate and help each other. So this is a great example of a social and mobile learning space. And also you don't really need much money to set this up anymore. You need a table, an opportunity and encouragement. Here's another one in Sojo University in Kumamoto in Japan. So again, students are coming, they're becoming very analog, so they're looking at books. They're not bothered about using computers so much anymore. They value the time to talk to people. Okay, so this is where we're at now. The basic psychological needs and well-being phase, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. The pandemic hit, of course, and affected everything, of course. But what happened is, in order to, it affected, so I think self-access kept evolving, but it maybe accelerated. It became much faster, and it relied on all of these 3 phases to provide good support for our students. So we relied on computers way too much because we had to. Social processes were really important to create that social connection, as we probably all remember. But then how do we also promote basic psychological needs and well-being? Well, we started to do it. Okay. Okay, so for the last part, I'm going to talk about phase 5, which is what I think we're in now. So this comes from self-determination theory, which comes from the work of DC and Ryan, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Huge theory of motivation. It's a meta-theory of motivation with many mini-theories within that. And it's got decades of really robust research in all sorts of fields, sports, to families, to business, all sorts of fields. And it hasn't really been applied to self-access until recently, but I think it fits really well. So I like it because it looks at what makes people thrive. theory of motivation and wellness, basically, but we look at what is it that helps people to thrive as they learn. So the three basic psychological needs, maybe you've come across it, is autonomy, which is a sense of agency over one's choices. So you decide what you're doing, what you want to do, based on who you are as a person, what your goals are, what your needs are, what drives you. You're in charge. And then competence is the need to interact effectively in your environment, be optimally challenged, and develop mastery and confidence. And then relatedness is how to be connected to others, feel a sense of belonging and mutual respect. Sorry, I'm going to go rather quickly, but for example, in a self-access centre then, how do we know our self-access centres promote, these three basic psychological needs? It's this huge space, all these different things happening. How do you know? So, how do you know it's a sense of agency? How do you know that learners are interacting optimally? And how do you know if they're connected to others? So think about it. How would you go about finding out this kind of information? Well, of course, we're a research institute, so we researched it. So this was our basic question. How do we know if our self-access centre supports basic psychological needs and well-being? And can you guess how we did it? What kind of research methods? What would you do? Yeah. Right, yeah, exactly. Yes. So basically we had three main questions, I guess. How autonomy supportive, which means, do we support basic psychological needs? How autonomy supportive is our SALC from the perspectives of different stakeholders? What requires more attention? And what actions could be taken? Because we wanted to learn from this to help our students even more. We wanted to see what we weren't doing as well as what we were doing to improve. So we did 108 structured interviews. This was a huge team. The team was made up of teachers, learning advisors, and students. So we went round and interviewed, structured interviews with all the users over a period of 2 weeks. And we also did a survey. We also did a structured evaluation of the space. So we went in and did a kind of audit, of key spaces to see what we noticed. We published this in several papers, so you can read them later if you want. Sorry, I don't have time to go into the results in detail, but just briefly, we did find that it's a largely autonomy supportive space, and it's inviting and welcoming, that's what students said. And then resources for a wide range of needs, interests and goals. So that's wonderful, and a relief because we work really hard to try to achieve this. In terms of competence support, the systems need, did I switch this off by mistake? No. The systems need further investigation, and we have been working on this since this study. So some students lack confidence and willingness to use English despite the supportive environment. So, we need to help them with this. There were some psychological barriers, like confidence, like, sense of identity. I'm not the kind of person who does this, this, and this, Sorry, I can't go into it today. And many students felt a sense of relatedness and belonging, but others felt like outsiders, So we've been working hard to try to include everybody. So it's very useful to know this. Some of the things we can do to create more autonomy supportive space. So obviously increase, so if you want to increase, I'm going to do autonomy, I'm going to do each psychological need. So in terms of autonomy, offer choices, what to study, when, where, how, with whom. Choice of language as well. If they want to use the target language, give them the opportunity. Or if they want to use the L1, that's okay. Or a mixture, that's okay. Let them be the choosers of this. Create opportunities for interest-based work, like through materials and activities. Give opportunities for student leadership. And advising is really important as well. So my daily work looks like this. I'm talking to students one-to-one, listening to them, and helping them to think deeply about what they want and how they're doing it. These are some student groups that have emerged because we've been promoting these student leadership and interest-based groups. They've organised activities based around these interests. And even online during the pandemic, this is the Star Wars group. They gave me permission to use this. They brought their props and everything, but they carried on. Even during the pandemic, they organised these supportive, interest-based groups during the pandemic on Zoom. terms of competence, students need to know how to learn. So we offer workshops, courses, modules, teaching them how to set a goal, how to choose resources, how to choose strategies, etc. Focus on their personal goals, offer lots of language practice opportunities and resources to support that, strategies to help them feel a sense of competence. Sorry, I'm going quickly, but I'm sharing the slides later. So we have courses. How many minutes left? Time up. Okay. Really? Should I stop right there? Can I just conclude? Okay. I have lots of time. Right? I have 15 minutes, but going into question time. So you can offer courses in how to do these things. And in terms of relatedness, the layout of the furniture really helps. Having students, staff and support and workshops and tasks and assignments that bring people together. So for example, some of the teachers give tasks, talk to somebody about this, this and this in English. And so the obvious place to go is to come to the SALC and find someone and talk to them in English. So it gives them a kind of push. This really helps. And I would say it should be optional. Don't force them to do it. But they can choose different assignments perhaps. But it's quite a popular one to come into the SALC and talk to one of the staff members or students about a topic. And the social, online social networking has helped with to create a sense of community as well online. Yeah, so this is the sort of layout of furniture that could create communities and groups, sofas rather than hardback chairs, for instance. Groups. All right, so basically what I'm pushing for, I guess, is to reimagine the SALC. So it's not just a place to come and study grammar. It's a place where you can provide language learning opportunities, but also support learners' basic psychological needs and inner motivational resources. This is a place where people can grow and thrive. And I hope that gives you a little sense of what that looks like in practice. And this is just summing up. Yeah, I was a bit ambitious tonight with you can see the slides later if you like. So what we've done today is looked at self-access through the years. We've looked at how to support learners. We looked at self-determination theory, basic psychological needs theory, and features of advising a little bit, how you listen carefully to students and help them to come up with what they want to do and to understand the complex process that is language learning. So when you look at your learning spaces, perhaps, I'm encouraging you to think about, are you supporting their autonomy, competence and relatedness? Think about it when you're there and consider how you can support not only their language learning, but help them to grow and thrive as human beings as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.